A person opens a messenger and sees a grim headline. The title calls on all those who have lost their minds to remain on the battlefield. The channel's author claims that all participants can be divided into 3 types. The first type has completely gone mad and is now consciously seeking his own death. Someone mumbles something unintelligible. The interlocutor asks again with irritation, not understanding a word of this incoherent stream. One character rudely orders another to get out of the way because he's just getting in the way. The demand to get out of the way is repeated with increasing menace. At this point, the second type of people is defined. These are the ones who rush into battle without armor or protection, driven by reckless courage. Amidst this chaos, the hero finally reveals his name, introducing himself as Ritsuki Kakuyama. The protagonist recalls the very moment when he received a letter of acceptance to the university. But immediately after receiving the letter, he bitterly states that he died there and then. Suki calls his past life shitty and full of disappointments. Suki ironically remarks that he died suddenly and absurdly, like a dog. However, when he opens his eyes, he is surprised to find that he has been reborn in the body of a boy named Ian. He finds himself the son of a simple peasant in a harsh medieval world. Like any peasant family in the empire, they are as poor as church mice. They have neither an extra coin nor a piece of bread to spare. Ian is the 3rd child out of 4, so he is always hungry. His eyes take on that tired emptiness that only chronic malnutrition can give. Parents and older brothers toil in the fields from morning until night. Ian and his younger sister spend their days wandering around the area in search of any edible grass or fallen fruit. Other children laugh at him and call him a crow because of his black hair. Ian didn't ask for this hair, and it makes him even more of an outsider among his white-haired peers. Ian bitterly curses the Middle Ages and wonders about his destiny. Why, after reincarnation, does he again find himself in poverty? Although he dreamed of a better life, hope glimmers when he finally gets a status window like in computer games. But joy quickly turns to disappointment. Even with this status window, he can't do anything. Numbers and characteristics do not give him food or the opportunity to change his destiny. Some ill-wisher rudely puts him down with an abbreviated curse. Even in the new world, he has enemies. Even if he toils from morning until night, they will still live in hunger. The system is designed in such a way that the peasant will never escape poverty. The hero does not understand what is happening around him and gradually loses the thread of events. Someone speaks kindly to the boy, calling him simply and affectionately. And this voice sounds unexpectedly warm in the midst of harsh reality. The character hesitantly asks if this place is Fellenberg territory, as if checking to see if he has arrived there after a long journey. The interlocutor confirms that this is indeed the same territory, but there is a slight hesitation or doubt in his voice. A surprised question arises nearby about whether this woman defeated the bear, which seems an unthinkable feat for an ordinary person. The stranger proudly introduces herself as Elidith, a wandering mage, thus making it clear that her abilities surpass those of the peasants. The short name, just 3 letters long, appears again, leaving the viewer in the dark as to who is speaking it and to whom it is addressed. Descriptions of important creatures with enormous destructive power and dangerous skills appear. The traveling mage explains that he is looking for a boy with black hair who lives in these parts, and his voice sounds purposeful. A local resident confirms that there are no other black-haired boys here besides Ian, making him the only target of the search. The sorceress concludes with satisfaction that, if this is so, then the child they are looking for is definitely him and no one else. Ian looks at her with a look that is a mixture of curiosity and fear of the unknown future, and at the same time, a lively, charming aura emanates from him. The protagonist skeptically remarks that all magicians are, frankly speaking, terrible eccentrics. And this stereotype is firmly ingrained in the minds of ordinary people. Ian had heard the same talk about the strangeness of mages, but now he couldn't help but admit that this woman was incredibly kind to him. He remembers the spell she used to kill the bear, and it was monstrously powerful. So powerful that the earth shook from one blow. Ian notes to himself that this spell incinerated the huge bear with one blow, leaving no chance for resistance. He timidly turns to the lady magician and asks if he can ask her one question that has been tormenting him since the fight. The wandering magician calmly replies that he is interested in magic, and this is evident in his glowing eyes and tense posture. Ian admits that he has heard that magic is something terrible and destructive, something that ordinary people should stay away from. But seeing her in person was amazing, and now he can't get the power that fell on the beast out of his head. The sorceress gently replies that there is really nothing special about it, and that once you learn, everything will be just as easy. She confidently states that anyone can learn magic, regardless of background or talent. Ian pauses, processing what he's heard, and his heart begins to beat faster with unexpected hope. He timidly asks again whether any person is really capable of mastering magic, as if not believing his own ears. The sorceress easily confirms that all you need to do is find a good teacher, and then everything becomes possible. She speaks directly to a boy named Ian and tells him that he too can become a magician if he really wants to. He exhales that he will be glad to learn from her. And at that moment, his whole past life with its bitterness and disappointments recedes into the background. Teacher Elidith begins to explain the basics of magic, and the main element of all magic turns out to be the mysterious Meronius. Ian listens carefully, trying to remember every word because his future depends on it. Elidith says that since they have received permission from the boy's parents and the local lord, he simply has to give it his all. Ian mentally confirms his readiness, and the teacher suggests that they begin classes immediately. A Meronius indicator appears on the screen, showing just 1% of mastery, and the learning process has begun. Ian diligently repeats strange sounds and runes, and the indicator slowly creeps up, showing 27%. 7 long years of hard training pass, and a mark appears on the screen indicating the elapsed time. Elidith announces that the theoretical part of the training is now complete, and the student is now ready for practice. In the status window, Ian Raven is now listed as a mage's apprentice and has mastered the magical language. The teacher says that now they will move on to the next step, which is more difficult and dangerous. Ian panics and exclaims that they are rushing too much because he has only just learned the basics, and they are already rushing him further. Elidith asks again, puzzled, if they are in a hurry, and there is a slight mockery in her voice. Ian complains that he has only learned Meronius in the last 6 years, which seems like incredibly slow progress to him. He desperately calls for help, feeling that he cannot cope with the onslaught of new knowledge and the teacher's demands. The teacher advises him to listen to the voices. Perhaps this is the secret to understanding the more subtle matters of magic. He listens and hears only the howling of the wind, but he is told that this is exactly what is needed. Ian gains a new skill called air art, which gives him the ability to control the wind. He can now control air currents and use wind magic for his own purposes. The teacher confirms that everything is correct, and the magicians draw their power from these very mysteries, communicating with them in a special language. Ian quietly says the word magic, as if tasting it and trying it on for his new life. He enthusiastically states that he can be relied upon and is ready to continue learning no matter what. Elidith announces that they will first master the art of water, and this will be the foundation for further elements. The teacher warns that Ian's body is starting to cool down, and this is a normal reaction to mastering the water element. Elidith praises him and says that he is doing great and learning at an incredible speed, surprising even her. Ian asks again in confusion, referring to his teacher, and cannot believe what is happening. Ian continues to master the arts one by one, and the earth comes to be the last element on the list. The teacher begins a lecture about how you can't call something flowing that has no movement, and this seems too philosophical to Ian. Ian is puzzled as to why he can't do anything and justifies it by saying that he is just a poor peasant boy. He begins to doubt himself and assumes that he simply has no talent for earthcrafting. Ian reflects on the fact that he should focus on other training rather than banging his head against the wall of fruitless attempts. He notices the skill window in front of him, and his gaze runs over the lines with the elemental mastery levels. Ian realizes that in this world he is some kind of cheater, because his progress is far ahead of all conceivable expectations. He decides that in this case, he just needs to raise the level of earth art, even if it is now the hardest thing to achieve. Ian admits to himself that he has no idea what his teachers are talking about when they give their difficult lectures. The status window displays his current levels, and he sees that his air, earth, and water arts are all at level 1. Someone approaches Ian and tells him that deep below the earth there is hot lava flowing. The voice warns him to be careful, because when an earthquake occurs, this lava will burst to the surface and destroy everything around. He decides that he needs to get up and tell the teacher that he heard the voice of the earth itself. Ian tries to use his new power and speaks a short command for the fire to burn according to his will. He also exclaims in amazement that he also learned the shadow arts from the darkness, not limiting himself to just the earth. The teacher asks again in confusion, not understanding what kind of shadows are being discussed. The teacher is surprised to note that he actually heard the voice of the earth, which is a great rarity even among experienced magicians. She wonders if such a breakthrough could have been expected from a cowardly and arrogant shadow like his. Ian shows concern and asks the teacher if she is okay after all this intense training. Elidith announces that it is time for them to descend from the mountains, because their journey here is coming to an end. Ian meekly agrees and asks where exactly they are heading next, full of hope for new adventures. The teacher gently stops him and tells him that she didn't mean what he thought. She explains that now their paths diverge, and each of them must go their own way. Elidith gives Ian his final instructions to go to the Chronicler and attend the Space-Time Conference of Mages. She explains that if he is destined to learn the temporal arts, he will meet someone at the conference who can teach him. The teacher adds that if her intuition does not fail her, then Ian will also be able to control time, like the great magicians of the past. Elidith makes an appointment with him in 3 years in the city of Arenheim, where he must reach at any cost. Ian is left alone and reflects on the fact that now he has to attend a conference of chronomagi, which he had never heard of before. He thinks about his teacher and admits that she is so unpredictable, and this both frightens and delights him. Ian feels like everything is happening too suddenly, and he hasn't had time to properly prepare for the breakup. He loudly asks if there is anyone going north and shouts that he is with them, trying to find fellow travelers on the long journey. Ian recalls that the teacher did indeed say that the Chronomagi conference would take place in the north. Ian finds himself in the north, and a passerby asks him if this is his first time in these cold regions. Ian responds politely, simply explaining that he had some business to attend to in the area. Lick continues his questioning and asks if Ian has heard of a certain dragon mountain full of secrets and dangers. Ian listens intently and discovers that up there in the mountain, the air is very special and real. Lick asks Ian directly if he knows how to fight, or at least run quickly from danger. Ian sheepishly admits that he's not good at either, and his voice sounds unsure. He notices that his interlocutor is behaving too familiarly, as if they have known each other for a long time, although this is not the case. Lick mockingly remarks that Ian is no good for anything and asks what he does in this life. Ian hums thoughtfully, choosing his words, and a determined look flashes in his eyes. He finally says that he is a magician, and the word hangs in the air like a challenge or a revelation. The interlocutor immediately changes his tone and respectfully calls him Mr. Magician, clearly impressed by what he heard. Someone is loudly and mockingly discussing Ian, wondering where this magician came from. Ian notices their sharp glances and hears them laugh at his modest appearance. One of the strangers exclaims in surprise and says that then any mongrel here could turn out to be a magician. The stranger encourages him and advises him to teach the scoffers a lesson by showing them who is boss here. She explains that mercenaries always bully quiet people, even if they are dealing with a real mage, and something needs to be done about it. The girl advises Ian to show his strength and properly intimidate the offenders so that they understand who they are dealing with. She adds that then, if something happens, these same people will be forced to protect Ian out of fear of his power. Ian agrees with this logic internally, but he is tormented by the question of how exactly he should proceed. He honestly admits to himself that he has never been particularly angry in his life, and does not know how to show aggression. Suddenly, the hero exclaims that he stepped on his plate, and a commotion and confusion begins around. People hear a strange sound and wonder what this vibration is, or if an earthquake is starting right now. Ian starts arguing about the purity of the water, saying it is dirty, full of lime, dirt, and parasites. He is outraged that he cannot simply wash dishes in such water because it is unsanitary. The interlocutor insists and claims that the water is actually much, much cleaner than Ian thinks. Ian repeats the word to himself, not believing his own ears, and his indignation grows with every second. He exclaims that it is beyond comprehension how such a liquid can be considered suitable for washing dishes. Ian is struck by medieval notions of hygiene, which seem wild and backward to him. Someone asks again with disbelief if this guy is really a real magician, and there is a hint of mockery in his voice. Ian tries to answer, but the words get stuck in his throat from indignation and misunderstanding. He hears a cry for water to be brought quickly, and this demand sounds like an order that does not tolerate objections. Something inside Ian turns over, and he can no longer contain his indignation. He breathes out insults at those around him, calling them dirty medieval bastards, and it sounds like a condemnation of their way of life. One of the pursuers nervously asks his companions if Cassie really went this way, and he wants guarantees. His friend confidently confirms that it is true, and then the first one, with a predatory smile, declares that this time Cassie will definitely be his. One of the men's eyes falls on the approaching figure and he points at it, saying that there she is. He calls out to the girl and says that it is already dark, so she must go with him without any objections. Cassie chuckles in surprise, not understanding who is addressing her and for what purpose. Ian, who is nearby, sees this whole scene and asks in fear who these people are attacking a defenseless girl. A strange battle cry is heard, and Cassie tries to defend herself from her attackers. Ian feels very unwell and says with disgust that there is drool on him. It is absolutely unacceptable and disgusting. The voice commands us to wake up and move faster, because we cannot waste a single second of precious time. Ian sees exclamation marks in front of him, which indicate extreme danger or surprise from what is happening around him. Someone shouts in fear that people are coming here. Ian feels a strange aura and is perplexed by what it is, because he has never encountered anything like this before. He gives a short cry saying his name, and there is alarm in his voice. Someone reports that they have big problems and the situation is getting out of control with every second. Cassie is in a panic thinking about what to do, because now these cruel people will catch her. The guy ominously says that now it's clear where she is and orders her to get up quickly, otherwise he will cut off her hand. And this is not an empty threat. The girl whispers in despair that it's all over and there is no more hope for salvation. A heart-rending cry is heard, full of pain and horror from what is happening around. Ian screams at her to stay close to him or she will be killed with the first blow. Several voices simultaneously tell the magician that they are ready to follow him and carry out orders. Ian collects his thoughts and says that if this is the case, then it is time to act decisively. He discovers something magical, and inexplicable things begin to happen around him. Someone asks in amazement what it is, because he has never seen anything like it before. Another voice panics and screams that he can't see anything in this pitch darkness. He is ordered to light the torches quickly, otherwise they will all perish in this darkness. Ian points in the direction and shouts for people to run there and follow him. Someone gets burned and complains about the hot flame of the torch, reminding that he, too, is a living person. Another voice suggests running in the other direction, but the first one objects that this is not the right direction. Everyone freezes in indecision, not knowing where to go next in this chaos. Ian makes a decision and uses a shadow art skill called dark vision. This skill allows him to see in the dark, and now he can navigate better than his pursuers. He confidently shouts that he knows where to go and orders everyone to follow him. Someone screams again in pain and surprise, and a heavy, ominous silence falls. Ian sees the enemy approaching and freezes for a moment in surprise. One of the mercenaries mutters in horror that they are facing both a magician and a dragon at the same time. And this is the end. Some say it is the work of an ancient mystery or a powerful being. Ian sees an inscription in front of him stating that he has witnessed the original mystery, and he freezes in amazement. He gains a new skill called summoning, which allows him to communicate with mystical creatures. This skill gives him the ability to call upon these creatures to help him in difficult times. Ian repeats the word summon thoughtfully, trying to comprehend that he can now do such a thing. He notices strange creatures around him and this little dragon, which also appeared out of nowhere. Ian looks thoughtfully at the creature that has appeared and wonders if it is the same creature as those he has met before. He reasons that if this is really the case, then he needs to be doubly careful in his actions and words. Ian shouts out Drake's name loudly, attracting the attention of this strange creature. Everyone nearby is babbling in fear, trying to address the magician, but the words are stuck in their throats. Ian confidently states that everything is fine, and he can handle any danger that threatens them. Suddenly, Ian says he is his friend, and it sounds like a promise of protection. The hero repeats that he is a friend and will not hurt anyone, and that he has no intention of fighting. And this calms the dragon down a little. The guy hears a strange hissing or growling sound and tries to understand what exactly this mystical creature wants to tell him. Ian notices that points can be used to level up skills, which opens up new possibilities for him. Ian decides to pump everything into the summoning skill, because right now it seems like the most correct path. Multiple pluses and messages appear on the screen, indicating that the summoning skill level has been successfully increased. Ian says with relief that he can hear it and can now communicate with the creature on equal terms. He timidly addresses the dragon, calling him Lord, and this shows his respect for the creature's power. The dragon growls and says that if he wants to say something, then he should say it all at once, without delay. Ian marvels at the amazing effect that leveling up his new skill has had. He boldly tells Mr. Dragon that they really don't want to fight him, and that's the honest truth. Ian adds that it is foolish to even think that some people could fight the great dragon, and that it would be suicide. He admits that they will lose in the blink of an eye, and the dragon will not even have to strain for such a paltry victory. Ian says that for a creature as powerful as a dragon, they are not even worth his time or attention. The dragon chuckles and asks again if this means they are begging him for mercy, and there is a hint of mockery in his voice. The dragon lazily remarks that killing such insignificant people is a hassle and not worth it. The dragon adds that he is just in a foul mood right now, and this could influence his decision. Ian looks at the dragon in horror and cannot utter a word from fear. He thinks in despair about what he will do now if the dragon decides to attack them. Ian addresses Mr. Drake respectfully and asks why he is in such a bad mood. The dragon answers a question with a question, not understanding why he would explain his feelings to just anyone. Ian says he thought he could help the dragon, and there's a genuine desire in his voice. The dragon utters a short word, curiously, and a spark of interest in this persistent magician awakens in his voice. Ian modestly introduces himself as just a seeker of the mysteries of this world, who hopes to offer his help. He addresses the dragon again, calling him Mr., which sounds unusual for such an ancient creature. The dragon finally agrees and says, "Good," making it clear that he is ready to listen to this strange man. The hero remembered how the teacher said that it was impossible to master magic without communicating with those who are its source. Ian understands that the type of relationship he builds with this mystical creature is of utmost importance. He wonders if they will become friends or if the secret will be his subordinate, and that will change everything. Each secret has its own unique nature, and the magician must be able to penetrate its essence to the end. Ian knows for sure that the most important skill for a magician is the ability to find an approach to other beings. He finally finds the solution and exclaims that this is it, and the word lightning appears. Ian looks at the dragon thoughtfully and says that we need to see what comes of it. He begins to guess that the dragon needs alcohol, and the larger the body, the stronger the drink must be. Ian hums, considering this strange but simple truth about the predilections of ancient beings. He advises to overwhelm the dragon with flattery, because even the proudest creatures love recognition. Ian looks at the bottle and wonders what it is and how he is supposed to work with it. He sighs and says that for a lonely man like him, it is an impossible task. Someone asks what other loner, and Ian realizes that he urgently needs to win over the dragon at any cost. They tell him that this is the only way to get things moving, and that there is simply no other way out. Ian politely apologizes for his impudence and gathers his courage for the next step. Ian explains that in the human world, the smaller the gift, the more valuable it is. And this is a special philosophy. He indignantly asks what exactly the dragon is unhappy with, and there is a note of despair in his voice. The hero hands the dragon a mug and tells him to hold it carefully. The dragon winces and asks, "What is that disgusting smell coming from this strange liquid?" He looks at Ian suspiciously and asks if he's up to something nasty with this stuff. Ian babbles fearfully that of course not, his voice shaking with tension. He decides to prove his honesty and says that he will allow himself to drink first, so that the dragon can be convinced. The dragon chuckled skeptically, but still took the cup in his huge paws. He takes a big sip and lets out a loud noise of satisfaction, unable to contain his emotions. Ian offers the dragon another one and explains that this variety is even better than the previous one, hoping to win his favor. The dragon looks at the new batch with interest and asks how it is, clearly expecting something unusual. He takes a big gulp and lets out a loud, drawn-out growl, indicating that the drink has gone to his head. The dragon asks in surprise if people really call this liquid a drink, and immediately admits that he likes it. Ian makes a mental note that this guy is a real alcoholic, and his plan begins to take a completely different turn. He thought about escaping while the dragon was sleeping after drinking, but that plan clearly wouldn't work in this situation. The dragon remembers that Ian asked him something, namely, why he was in a bad mood. Ian confirms that yes, this is indeed the case, and his interest in dragon matters deepens. Someone nearby is surprised that the dragon suddenly got sentimental and started talking about his feelings. The dragon complains that his nest is in an inconvenient location and is very cramped compared to others. Ian understands what is going on and is surprised that this scary dragon has a girl with such a face. The dragon says that he himself did not notice how the other dragons began to mock her because of his wretched home. He felt so sorry for her because of people like himself, and his voice trembled with the pain of memories. The dragon felt so sorry for his beloved that he decided to part with her for her own good. Ian lets out a loud cry of horror at how human this powerful creature's experiences were. He understands that the dragon's experiences of love are no different from those of humans, and this strikes him to the depths of his soul. Ian thinks for a moment and tells himself to wait, mentally formulating a new course of action. He understands that if he plays things right, he can use this situation to his advantage. Ian boldly tells the dragon that he can use magic to improve its nest, and it sounds like a promise. The dragon asks in surprise if he can really do such a thing, and hope lights up in his eyes. Ian confirms that he does, but in return, he asks the dragon for something important. Some time passes, and everyone gradually comes to their senses after the recent chaos. A rude warning is given that if the recipient does not wake up right now, the speaker will pull out his finger. Then a loud cry is heard, like a blow. One of the mercenaries turns to the master magician in confusion and asks what is going on here. He says he's sure he heard a dragon roar, and immediately after that, everyone just passed out without explanation. One of them curses and mutters his regrets at the very moment he got involved with these magicians and their problems. Another voice asks if the dragon returned to its nest after everything that happened. They answer him that no, the dragon is waiting above, and it is unknown whether to eat them or for something else. Ian firmly states that the dragon is waiting for him because he made a deal with it to save everyone else. The mercenaries are whispering that this gentleman magician is using some strange words and seems to have overdone it with courage. Ian explains that he promised the dragon to fix his nest if he would let all the people go free. Someone loudly proclaims Ian as a great magician, praising him. Ian looks at the people in surprise and doesn't understand what they're up to with these strange exclamations. The crowd begins to chant praises for Mr. Ian, claiming that he has defeated the roaring dragon. People shout about his victory and demand that his name be praised again and again without stopping. Ian says that, whatever the case, they should be ready to hit the road by the time he returns. Ian sternly orders them not to leave without him because he is now responsible for them. They tell him not to worry because they are truly one with him in spirit and body. Ian climbs up to the dragon's nest and looks at it, thinking about the work ahead. He says wow in surprise, assessing the scale of destruction and desolation around him. The dragon tells him that it is too late to retreat, and Ian replies that he had no intention of retreating, but was simply looking around. He admits that he needs to use Meronius, and it will not be easy in these conditions. Ian feels like his calculations are declining, and he needs to quickly sort out the nest and get some rest. He understands that if he removes the protruding stones and levels the walls, the interior will become much more spacious and comfortable. Ian looks thoughtfully at his work and says that everything is fine, reassuring himself. He comes to the dragon with another request, but he replies that he is not in the mood and is very busy. Ian sighs and realizes that the dragon is truly angry at him for interfering in his personal life. The dragon says that she is not his destiny after all, and thanks Ian for trying so hard for such a worthless person like him. Ian quietly says the dragon's name, Drake, and there is genuine sympathy in his voice. The dragon asks the magician his name, and a spark of genuine interest flashes in his eyes. Ian introduces himself and says that his full name is Ian Eridus Raven, but you can just call him Ian. The dragon reveals his name to be Drake Allenotail and offers to make Ian friends forever. A notification appears on the screen about receiving a new dragon summoning art skill. Now Ian can ask his dragon friend for help, and he will gladly answer the call. Ian gains this skill, but he becomes very ashamed of the fact that he cannot help his new friend in any way in return. The dragon says that in honor of their new friendship, he will give Ian a gift and let him take as much as he wants from his treasures. Ian remembers his teacher's words and realizes that she was absolutely right, because dragons love to collect treasures. He looks thoughtfully at the pile of jewels and notes that all dragons seem to be alike in their passion for shiny things. Ian admits that he had completely forgotten about the method his teacher taught him many years ago. Ian begins to cast a spell and utter strange words, turning to the earth with a plea for help. The earth responds to his call and asks what this new man needs this time. Ian commands the earth to move the rocks aside and straighten the walls of the cave to make the space more spacious. Ian looks at the result of his work and cannot believe his eyes. The dragon looks around in amazement and asks if this is really his nest, which has been so transformed in just a few moments. Ian proudly says that this is his gift to the dragon as a sign of their new friendship and mutual respect. The dragon lets out a loud cry of delight and says how spacious and comfortable he now feels in his renovated home. The dragon asks Ian if he also created this wonderful scent with his amazing magic. Ian honestly answers that no, this smell has nothing to do with his witchcraft and appeared on its own. The dragon says that now he will not be ashamed in front of his beloved for such a wretched dwelling. The dragon is glad that it will now be safe here, even when he has children, and no one will harm them. Ian makes a confused sound as he feels his body begin to weaken from exhaustion. Cassie calls him and tells him that they have to go because time is running out. The dragon shouts at him to hold on, then calls his name in concern. Cassie whispers to the dragon to wait and listen, and there is desperation in his voice. She reminds the dragon that she is a friend of the magician and begs him for leniency and help. Several voices simultaneously call out to the hero, asking where he is and if he is okay. Ian lets out a weak groan, coming to his senses after a long spell of unconsciousness. When he wakes up, he immediately asks what time it is and where his phone is so he can find out the time. He repeats the word telephone as if it were the most important word in the world. Ian asks in confusion why it has become so soft and sticky to the touch. He wonders if his phone has turned into a jelly bean right in his pocket. He hears Cassie's voice and wonders why she knows his name, since they hardly know each other. Cassie gently tells him that he should lie down for a little while longer because his head is still foggy. Ian is advised not to get up so suddenly, and is asked if he is okay after everything that happened. Ian nods and remembers that he forcibly raised the level of his summoning magic, talked to the dragon, and even got a nosebleed. Ian looks around and quietly asks where the dragon is that was just next to him. He thinks to himself that he could die of shame because he so stupidly lost consciousness in front of everyone. Ian tells those around him not to worry because he is perfectly fine. He whispers that the dragon called him a friend, and now he probably went to his girlfriend. The hero asks Ian how Cassie managed to get here in the first place, since the dragon doesn't allow strangers in. The girl replies that she simply told the dragon that she was Ian's friend, and that was enough. Ian asks in surprise to repeat the word girlfriend, and Cassie nods affirmatively and says, "Yeah." Ian asks if she spoke to the dragon in Moronius, but the girl doesn't understand what he means. She asks again what it is, and there is genuine bewilderment in her voice. Cassie says she's really sleepy after everything she's been through in the last few hours. She admits that she followed Ian, even though she knew it was mortally dangerous, but she couldn't do otherwise. Cassie approaches the magician Ian and says that she wants to ask him for something very important. Ian asks what exactly, his eyes flickering with both concern and curiosity. The girl replies that yesterday's attack by bandits was entirely her fault and lowers her eyes to the floor. She says that he is probably surprised, but she apologized for dragging him into this, and her voice trembles. Cassie explains that the situation has suddenly become so difficult because of her, and it is weighing on her. Ian understands that's why she was shaking so much yesterday when they were attacked by bandits. Ian asks, dumbfounded, if this means she was in league with those bandits. Cassie indignantly exclaims that no, and asks what is so gangster-like about her that anyone could think such a thing. She adds that good looks are a classic fantasy trope, and Ian doesn't even deny it. The girl admits that this is actually a secret, but she decided to trust him to the end. Cassie says that she is not really Cassie, and her eyes become serious and sad. Ian asks who she is then and freezes, waiting for an answer. Cassie says she's the princess of this country, and that name comes out of the blue. The girl reveals her real name and says that her name is Lucy of the Tarian clan, and it sounds proud and noble. She explains that those bandits were sent by her own fiancé to kidnap her and return her to the palace. Lucy explains that the Tarian family is a baronial house that rules the Fianlep region, but their position is very precarious. Because they lack knights to defend their borders, they are constantly under threat of attack from their neighbors. Eventually, the Tarian family decided to marry her off to a knight who had previously been a mercenary captain. Since he was the captain of the fastest-growing mercenary company, external threats to their kind became significantly less. At first, even he seemed pleased with his new position as the husband of a noble baroness. But over time, he began to use his position to seize power in the House of Tarian. He took up with other women and began to treat Lucy with contempt, making no secret of his disrespect. Lucy's parents decided they couldn't stand it any longer and demanded that she break off her engagement to this scoundrel. Ian freezes as he listens to this terrible story and waits for the continuation. Lucy says with pain in her voice that this murderer and bastard poisoned her parents right before they were about to announce their breakup. Ian exclaims in shock, not believing that a person is capable of such meanness towards his own future relatives. Lucy explains that if the engagement were broken, the groom would lose all his power and position in society, so he poisoned her parents so that they would remain silent forever and could not interfere with his plans. Lucy lets out a soft whimper, her shoulders shaking with barely contained sobs. Ian silently notes what a bad person this guy is, and his heart fills with sympathy for the poor girl. He understands that no matter how much he swings his sword and pretends to be a warrior, without marrying Lucy, he will remain a commoner. The groom will not be able to inherit either the Tarian family or the fortune of Lucy's parents unless she marries him. That's why Lucy escaped with the help of one of her faithful servants, hoping to escape this terrible fate. She says she would rather die than marry him, and there is an iron determination in her voice. Lucy is sure that he will definitely not give up trying to catch her and force her to walk down the aisle, so she begs Ian to help her get to a safe place where no one will find her. Ian sighs and says that the situation is indeed difficult, and he understands why she can't cope alone. He reflects on the fact that poisoning his future father-in-law and mother-in-law for the sake of power is a real atrocity. And now, because of this scoundrel, his bride is about to be kidnapped and no one can help her. Ian admits he doesn't even know what to think about all this medieval cruelty. He does not understand at all how these medieval rulers think, for whom power is more important than human life. Lucy swears on the honor of the Tarian family that she will generously reward Ian for his help and protection. Ian looks at her thoughtfully and asks why he should help her when there are other magicians. He asks a provocative question about what will happen if he betrays her and sells her to her fiancé for a reward. Lucy replies that the guy is a terrible miser, so even if Ian turns her in, he will only get a couple of silver coins. She explains that the groom is so greedy and petty that he won't give an extra penny for her, but she herself can give Ian everything he wants, and his eyes widen in surprise. Lucy promises that if he helps her, she will even give him the entire Tarian family in gratitude for saving her. Ian looks at Lucy thoughtfully and asks if she means to say that even a simple guy like him could marry her. Lucy begins to sob softly, and Ian wonders, frightened, if he said something offensive. He lets out a confused sigh and notices that the girl is crying, even though he only offered his help. Ian tries to explain that he meant to help, but didn't want to upset her with his words. Lucy thanks him through tears and says thank you for agreeing to take a risk for her. A dragon appears, joyfully greeting his friend and saying that he is glad to see him. Ian replies that he's fine, and notes that he even tans to look cool in front of the girl. The dragon says that it is time for them to descend from the mountain, because everyone is already waiting for them below. Ian reminds the dragon about the gift, and the dragon thanks him for his generosity and care. The dragon waves his hand modestly and says nonsense, then offers to give them a ride on his back. Ian thanks the dragon, calling him Longtail, and his eyes glow with genuine warmth. The dragon turns to Lucy and tells Ian's girlfriend to climb on him too without any embarrassment. Lucy yelps in surprise as she is lifted onto the dragon's back. Ian indignantly shouts that everything is not as the dragon thinks, but he does not understand what the problem is. Someone nearby is puzzled as to what they are talking about and cannot understand their hints. One of the surviving mercenaries says that all the mercenaries who were with them died, and he saw it himself. He warns that if these bandits are still roaming around here, even they could die at any moment. Another voice objects and says that there is still loyalty and honor that should protect them. Another adds that if the bandits had any brains, they would have long ago fled from the forest where the dragon appeared. He is confident that robbers will not wander through a forest in which such a terrible creature as a dragon lives. His opponent argues that the bandits have no common sense and are definitely on their heels. Lit asks everyone to calm down and lets out a short cough, drawing attention to himself. One of the mercenaries firmly declares that they will wait for the magician, no matter how long it takes. Suddenly a cry was heard that bandits had attacked a camp, and everyone grabbed their weapons. One of the mercenaries regrets that he had to leave without waiting for the magician, but the other urges him not to lose heart. The bandit shouts that they will finish them off in one fell swoop and lets out an angry war cry. The terrified traders scream for help and say they will give whatever they want just so long as they are spared. The leader of the bandits demands that they give them a woman who is hiding among the travelers. One of the mercenaries asks fearfully about the woman and does not understand who they are talking about. The bandit confirms that he heard about the beauty with dark blue hair, and there is no need to pretend to be fools. Someone from the caravan remembers that very beauty with dark blue hair. He says that if the bandits mean that girl, then her name is Cassie, and she is somewhere around here. The bandit demands that Cassie be found quickly and brought to him, otherwise he will start killing hostages. The mercenaries look at each other in fear and realize that she is no longer here, and no one knows where she went. The bandit looks at the sky in horror and asks again if this is really a magician, and points to the flying figure. His comrade confirms and shouts that it is over there, and everyone simultaneously raises their heads to the sky. One of the robbers recognizes Lucy and says that this is not the very woman they are looking for on the orders of the groom. Another bandit confirms that yes, it looks like the same one, and his voice trembles with fear. The third one adds that what she is sitting on and flying through the sky is a real dragon. The gang leader says it's a good thing Cassie was with the master magician, because those people could have done something terrible to her. Ian thoughtfully repeats the name of the Church of the Heavenly God to himself and becomes lost in thought. He says he hasn't heard the name for ages, and it brings back vague memories. Someone explains that the great religion of this world is precisely the Church of the Heavenly God, which has enormous power. Its teachings forbid the enslavement of fellow believers, but human traffickers have long ignored these commandments for the sake of profit. Ian approaches a dragon named Longtail and asks him for a favor for a friend. The dragon happily agrees and says that he will do anything for Ian, even the most impossible. Ian asks the dragon to deal with those who were here before, and if necessary, to kill them. The dragon replies that his friend's request is a joy to him, and he will fulfill it in the best possible way. Ian stifles a painful cough, feeling the magic draining his strength again. Cassie notices that Ian has been overdoing it with Moronius's language again, and it's harming his health. Lit, one of the observers, notices how close Ian and Lucy are, and asks if they are actually dating. Ian mentally calls this an Olympic question, not knowing how to answer it. He understands that the dragon will destroy the man at his request, and this frightens him with its simplicity. Ian notes that it is convenient, of course, that the summoning magic automatically reports the situation with the dragon, but he wishes he could summon the dragon right here, wherever he goes. Ian says the word mage quietly, and there is a weariness in his voice from constantly using the power. He thanks the dragon for bringing them so close to safety. Ian regrets that he won't be able to see the dragon during his journey north. The dragon asks if Ian is interested in the secrets of the phoenix, and a mysterious light flickers in his eyes. Ian repeats the word phoenix thoughtfully, his heart beating faster with anticipation. The dragon says there are rumors that an ice phoenix, an unheard-of rarity, lives in the northern mountains. He advises Ian to go and check out these rumors for himself, as it could be a great adventure. The phoenix is a bird that does not disappear even after its death. Ian learns that the phoenix is known not only as a firebird, but also as a creature that changes appearance depending on the elements. Phoenix can be made of ice, wind, or stone, adapting to its environment. One of the mercenaries approaches the master magician and says that they are just on their way to meet with the local lord. He asks Ian if he would like to go with them and introduce himself to the nobleman. Ian muses that in order for Lucy to escape her fiancé safely, she would do well to stay away from high-ranking people. He turns to Cassie and says that if she has nowhere to go, she can come with them and no one will hurt her. The girl hums thoughtfully, considering this proposal and weighing the pros and cons. Lit remarks contentedly that he knew it all along, and now he's absolutely certain that Ian and Lucy are dating. Lucy suggests that Ian pretend that she is with him because it saves her from having to deal with all sorts of annoying idiots. Ian asks again in surprise, "Is that so?" and doesn't know whether to be happy or upset by such a proposal. Lucy asks Ian why he is so polite to commoners, since he is now a powerful magician. Ian replies that he himself is a commoner, the son of an ordinary farmer, and sees no reason to change his attitude towards people. He says that he is a magician now, but that doesn't mean he should look down on others and treat them like dirt. Ian explains that he is simply emulating his teacher, who is just as approachable and polite to everyone without exception. He admits that he wants to be like his teacher, kind and open to all people. Lucy asks Ian about his plans and where he plans to go after he helps her. Ian replies that he first thinks of visiting Count Katina, who can help him with his mission. Lucy is surprised to notice that Count Katina is her maternal uncle, and this is an incredible coincidence. She says that if she explains the whole situation to her uncle, he should help her and protect her from the evil groom. Ian asks if Lucy's mother was close to the Earl, and how much this man can be trusted. Lucy evasively replies that they weren't exactly enemies, but they weren't particularly close either. Upon entering the hotel, the owner warmly greets the guests and wishes them welcome to his establishment. Ian politely says they'd like to stop for a couple of nights and take a bath after the journey. He takes out some coins and asks if this will be enough for accommodation and all amenities. The owner replies that more than enough, and he will immediately prepare the best rooms in the hotel for them. He asks Lucy if the young lady will also take a bath, or only the master magician. Lucy exclaims indignantly, "No way!" and her face flushes with embarrassment. Ian asks why he even had to say such a thing out loud, and whether it wouldn't have been easier to keep quiet from the start. Ian firmly states that this means that only he will take a bath, and Lucy can wait her turn. The owner nods understandingly and says that he understands everything and will now organize everything in the best possible way. Lucy sighs heavily and says that honestly, it's simply impossible. How can one be so insensitive? The girl asks to be called Cassie, not Princess, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Lucy insists that Ian just do it, now, without thinking, because they are already being watched from all sides. Ian exhales tiredly and complains that it is so stuffy and hot in this coat. It is impossible to be in it. Passers-by at the hotel notice Lucy and whisper that it is the first time in their lives they have seen such a beautiful girl. They compare her to an angel and are surprised that such a beauty is traveling with some weakling who is clearly not a match for her. One of them offers to steal the girl and have some fun with her while her companion doesn't notice. Meanwhile, in the castle, the ruler of Riverville, Baron Cars, receives petitioners and discusses business with them. He gives instructions to work hard and make sure that there are no problems in his territory. One of the servants dreams that if he manages to win the Baron's favor, he will even be able to settle in this castle. One of the merchants timidly turns to the Baron and says that he would like to tell him something in secret. The Baron graciously allows him to speak and promises to listen to everything he has to say. The merchant admits that his respect for the Baron is so great that he simply can no longer hide the truth. The Baron chuckles contentedly and calls this commendable, then tells him to continue his story. The merchant explains that during their journey they met a powerful magician who saved their lives. He shows with gestures how the magician waved his hand, and then again, and the dragon obeyed him without words. The Baron exclaims in surprise that this is truly impressive, and asks to tell him more about such an incredible man. The merchant says that this is not all, because this great magician is now staying at an inn right here in the city. The Baron jumps up from his seat and shouts what he said, not believing his ears at such news. He understands that it would be bad if this unpredictable magician suddenly flared up and unleashed his dragon on his lands. The Baron panics and thinks that things could get even worse, because right now, a group of bandits is already located on his territory. They tell him that these are the Holy Knights of Santiago, who are famous for their cruelty and fanaticism. Driven by their devotion to the god of war, they took up arms and roamed the lands in search of demons and monsters. They are both monks and martial artists who have proclaimed themselves to be the protectors of humanity. The Baron wonders what would happen if this order of Knights of Santiago were to encounter the magician who tames the dragon on his lands. He realizes in horror that this could lead to a catastrophe and the complete destruction of his possessions. The Baron cries out in panic and cannot utter a word out of fear for his fate. He orders that the Knights of Santiago be called immediately, and says that they need to be spoken to urgently. The Baron orders that a room be prepared for this man and that he be accommodated with maximum comfort. He decides that it will be easier to negotiate with the knights than with this crazy magician, whom no one controls. Meanwhile, Ian sits in the hotel and impatiently asks when they will finally bring him his long-awaited food. The girl apologizes guiltily and says that she will prepare everything right now and asks for forgiveness for the delay. She mumbles that she hasn't even filled the bath yet and feels very awkward in front of such an important guest. Ian decides that he can handle everything himself, and there is no need to serve him, because it is he who needs it, not the owner. He says that he will deal with the bathroom himself, and the owner can go do other things. The servant politely asks if he is disturbing and apologizes for interrupting Ian from his meal. At this time, a stranger approaches Lucy and addresses her as a girl, the companion of that black-haired gentleman. He asks if she is the same girl, and Lucy cautiously asks who he is and what he wants. The stranger introduces himself as a simple messenger, hired by her companion to deliver an important message. He says he was hired to immediately take the miss to the pier, where a boat is already waiting for her. Lucy is surprised that Ian should be in the bathhouse now and does not understand how he could have managed to hire a messenger. The bellhop explains that something seemed to have happened when he went to the bathhouse in the backyard of the inn. Lucy panics, wondering if those bandits have tracked them down and that they are now in mortal danger. The messenger hurries her and says that they have little time and asks her to go with him immediately. Without hesitation, Lucy looks around in confusion and quietly calls Ian's name. Not knowing what to do in this situation, she makes a frightened sound and cannot move from the spot due to the overwhelming fear. Ian hears piercing cries for help and realizes that Lucy is in danger. Ian notices that these people clearly do not look like those sent by Lucy's fiancé, and this makes him even more wary. He understands that in front of him is just some trifle that has no relation to their pursuers. One of the attackers shouts faster, hurrying his accomplices before the magician arrives. Ian looks at the bandit with disdain and asks if he really thinks he can escape from him. He sighs and says what a hassle it is to get involved with this gang that knows no fear. The leader of the bandits understands that it was because of this magician that they escaped and were unable to steal the girl. Ian admits to himself that with his current power, he cannot cast spells as well as he would like. Of all the mysteries that are within his power, he only needs to find the one that he can apply in this situation. Ian casts a spell and says it's time, because their light is fading right before their eyes. He decides that this is just enough time to have a little fun with these bandits. Ian grins and challenges his enemies to play his game. One of the attackers recognizes the voice and realizes that they have fallen into a trap. Ian contemptuously calls his opponent trash and remarks that he called for his mommy like a little child. He rudely asks the bandit where they put the girl. Otherwise, it will be worse. The bandit is surprised to notice that Ian can still see him in this pitch darkness, and this shocks him. Ian calls him puppy and demands an answer again, losing his patience with this game. Suddenly, a commanding voice is heard, commanding that enough be done, and everyone freezes in place. The Holy Knights of Santiago appear, and Ian realizes that he now has new enemies. Ian calmly introduces himself to the knights and says that he is the very magician who created this darkness around them. Then he looks at one with disdain and thinks to himself that this pathetic blood is simply insane, and wonders what kind of old man this is in front of him. One of the bandits begs the knights to save him and protect him from this cruel magician. He lies to the knights and says that the magician tried to kill him just like that, without any reason or cause. The old knight calmly asks what exactly the man did to deserve such an attack. The bandit screams hysterically, trying to play the victim, and the knight coldly remarks that he understands everything. He says that since this guy is a magician, then such behavior is quite possible, because magicians have always been unpredictable. Ian groans indignantly, unable to find words in response to such an unfair assessment of his actions. He indignantly asks what possibly means, and how one can trust the words of some bandit. Ian asks if magicians are just like everyone else, and why are they considered some kind of monsters? The knight replies that magicians do whatever they want, and no one can stop or punish them. Ian lets out an angry cry and barely restrains himself from saying too much. The old knight looks at Ian thoughtfully and says that he has a very sharp tongue for a magician, and this is quite unusual. However, the knight immediately adds that this does not give Ian the right to use evil magic against people. Ian asks in surprise what kind of evil magic this is, and doesn't understand what they're talking about. The knight explains that plunging everything around into darkness means turning away from the sun, which is the eye of heaven. He says that hiding in the dark is the lot of cowards, and a true warrior always fights in the light of day. Ian looks at the knights skeptically and thinks to himself that these guys are speaking in some kind of religious metaphors. He guesses that they are probably followers of the Church of the Sun, who worship the light. Ian lets out a short cough and gathers his thoughts to answer this fanatic. He asks the knight a tricky question. If the will of heaven is contained in light, then why does night exist at all? The knight admits that he was mistaken and asks forgiveness for his haste and prejudice. Ian politely asks if he can go now because his sister has been kidnapped and he needs to find her. The knight asks in surprise if this means that Ian attacked the bandit because he was one of the kidnappers. Ian answers haltingly that no, not exactly, but he can't explain everything now. The knight orders his comrade named Dietrich to stay here and keep an eye on the bandit. He obediently answers. The knight politely apologizes to the master magician and says that he asks for forgiveness for taking up his precious time. He promises that as an apology, he will allow himself to help Ian find his sister. Ian points to the pier and says that this is the very place that the witness to the abduction spoke about. They understand that now, after sunset, sailing a boat on the river is very dangerous and they can drown. However, the knight resolutely exclaims that no matter what, they will do it. Ian asks impatiently what's next and what are they waiting for? Time is running out. The knight solemnly declares that for the sake of saving one unknown soul, they will break through this darkness together. He calls the Knights of the Order of Santiago protectors of the weak and says that it will be an honor for them to accompany Ian. Ian notes to himself that they really are a true knightly order with honor and dignity. He thinks that defending the weak is pretty cool, and his opinion of these people changes. Ian warns that it is dangerous to get into the boat now, but the knights are already jumping into it, not listening to him. The knight asks in surprise if he is really going to push the boat right in the middle of the river. One of the knights looks at Ian in surprise and asks if he doesn't master the art of shadow. Ian calmly explains that he has mastered the basic levels of several different schools of magic, and this is not unusual. The knight says that this is very strange, because all the magicians he saw on the battlefield only possessed one type of magic. Ian looks at the river and exclaims in surprise that here it is, and begins to cast a spell. The knight watches in amazement as the water parts for the boat and says that this surpasses any water art he has seen. Ian sighs wearily, feeling the magic draining his already weak strength once again. The people in the boat scream in fear as the water begins to churn and foam around them. A girl runs up to the main character, cries out his name in tears, and begins to hug him. Lit reproachfully tells Ian, "What is he doing? He brought his sister to tears with his recklessness." The old knight remarks that Ian has obviously had a very difficult time lately and expresses his sympathy to him. Lucy sobs and can't stop the flow of emotions that come over her after everything she's been through. Suddenly, a loud alarm is heard and someone commands everyone to return to their homes immediately. A squad of armed men led by Bernard, the eldest son of Lord Rivervile, appears on the road. A Rivervile knight named Hansen sternly remarks that what they see before them is a luxury unaffordable for ordinary citizens. Ian looks at the traces of magic on the ground and understands that there is no doubt that these are the consequences of a recent battle. Baron Kars spoke with alarm, wondering if his fears had really come true and the magician had turned out to be as violent as he had expected. Knight Hansen grumbles that it's already a headache to drag this pampered little bar along with him. And now there's the magician with his antics. A young nobleman offers to rub Ian's back, and another takes the other side, as if they were servants and not guards. Bernard loudly expresses indignation and asks what is going on here and why everything around is in ruins. One of the knights calmly explains that they are taking a bath and do not understand what is so unusual about it. Bernard asks again in surprise, "Bath?" and can't believe his ears that someone is washing themselves right on the street. He is indignant that the inhabitants of the empire wash rarely, only on special occasions, and here it is right in the middle of the courtyard. One of the knights, named Elder, introduces himself to Master Bernard and offers to explain everything. Bernard indignantly asks why he is the one answering when the question was asked to a completely different person. The knight sheepishly apologizes and explains that it is because the man is a magician, and he is only his assistant. Bernard asks again in surprise, his eyes lighting up with unhealthy interest. The magician must be planning to do this, and his power could be dangerous to those around him. Ian recalls that in this world, the nobility has a cultural tradition known as mage baiting. Simply put, it is a custom by which nobles test the patience of magicians and their ability to control their anger. This is done in order to determine how dangerous the magician is, and whether he should be feared or respected. A mage who calmly endures provocations is considered weak and does not deserve the respect of the nobility. Ian realizes that this is the very same witch hunt that Lucy told him about at the very beginning of their journey. He firmly declares that he refuses to participate in this stupid game and will not prove anything to anyone. Bernard asks again in a rage, "You refuse," and his face turns red with resentment. He shouts that people like Ian cannot go against him, the heir of an ancient family. Ian calmly asks why on earth he should do whatever some insolent boy orders. Bernard orders Sir Hansen to get this false magician out of there this very minute, dead or alive. The knight sighs and notices that the acting is starting to get tiresome and pulls Bernard by the hand. Ian says, okay, if that's the case, then he'll show them what real magic is and not just children's toys. Bernard shouts that he is a false magician and has no right to call himself a wizard after such disrespect. The next day, Baron Kars receives Ian at his castle and thanks him for accepting the invitation. He says that he heard that his son caused the magician a lot of trouble and offers his sincere apologies for his behavior. Ian replies that no. Rather, he should apologize for going too far in his anger. The Baron asks what happened to his companion and why Ian came alone, since he heard that there was some girl with him. Ian explains that she had business to attend to, so she stayed at the inn and did not go with him to the castle. He thinks to himself that there is no need to show Lucy's face once again in front of the local nobility, who might recognize her. The Baron promises that they will definitely look after Ian's sister and make sure that nothing happens to her. He asks if he can know the name of Ian's teacher who taught him such powerful magic. Ian replies that his teacher's name is Mrs. Arans, and she went south on business. It seems that the Principality of Palgar has set its sights on Roxlin, and this could lead to a major war on the borders. Ian understands that this means that a real war with bloodshed and destruction could begin. The Baron asks if Ian is also heading south, into the heart of this conflict, and if he fears for his life. Ian tells the Baron that no, he is heading east in search of an ancient secret that the dragon told him about. Ian exclaims in surprise as he looks at what the Baron hands him, not understanding what this strange object is. He asks curiously what it is, and the Baron invites him to open the case and take a look. Ian takes a long staff out of its case and says in surprise, "Staff," and his eyes light up with interest. The Baron explains that this staff once belonged to a renowned aeromancer who controlled the wind itself. Ian sincerely thanks the Baron and says that he will gratefully accept this gift and will cherish it. Suddenly, Ian runs into the hall out of breath and cannot utter a word from horror. The girl turns to Ian and says that she needs his help. Otherwise, something irreparable will happen. Ian sees a raven in front of him and says this word in surprise, not understanding where this bird came from. The knight explains that this morning a hunter caught this raven and was about to eat it, but your little sister stopped him and saved him from death. The girl exclaims, "Isn't this fate?" and clearly expects Ian to confirm this sign from above. He asks hopefully if this is really fate, and Ian must admit that the raven came to him on its own. Ian angrily apologizes for causing his sister so much trouble, adding that they might eat him if he's bothering them so much. Lucy asks everyone to stand still and not make any hasty decisions because the raven needed to be saved. The raven looked at Ian pleadingly and asked him to save him, and his voice sounded right in the magician's head. Ian looked at the bird in surprise and could not understand what kind of strange creature this was in front of him. The raven asked again to be saved, and his eyes filled with fear and hope at the same time. Ian ordered the raven to answer what it was, but the bird continued to beg for help without answering the question. Ian barked at the raven to be quiet for a second and promised to save him if he calmed down. He cried out in despair that he had already said that he would save her, so just let him not interfere with his thinking. Ian realized that this guy might not understand words, but he had a great sense of the situation, which made him happy. The knight asked in surprise. He had just spoken to a raven and couldn't believe it. Lucy said, "Please leave him here for now," and proudly added that she knew this raven was not simple. Lucy boasted that, of course, she had never studied, but she seemed to have a talent for magic, and this delighted her. Ian sighed and thought to himself that she had gotten carried away, and now she would not stop until she told everyone about it. Lucy assured him that the raven would soon recover, and that his wing would heal in no time once he had some rest. Lucy asked what they should do with the raven now, and suggested returning it to the hunters since it was in the way. Ian thoughtfully noted that then he would simply be eaten, and that would not be the best solution. The raven begged them not to leave him, and said that the people here were so scary that he was afraid to be left alone. The bird again begged Ian to save her, and he sighed, realizing that there was no escape from this hassle. Lucy asked happily, "So they were taking him with them?" And her eyes lit up with delight. Ian replied that at least until the raven recovered, it could not be abandoned to its fate. Lucy said that then we need to give him a name, and it should be something special and beautiful. Ian asked again in surprise, "The name?" and did not understand why this was needed at all. Lucy suggested naming the raven Obsidian because he had such beautiful black eyes, like precious stones. Ian noted to himself that this guy liked Lucy messing around with him, and he was clearly jealous of the bird towards her. He said that the name was too long. Let it be Oberon, short and noble. And Lucy enthusiastically agreed. Lucy solemnly announced that from now on, his name would be Oberon, and the raven nodded his head in satisfaction. The old knight overheard their conversation and asked Ian what he was so worried about. He said that no matter how capable a magician Ian was, traveling alone with a woman in the wilderness was dangerous. The knight offered to make a deal regarding a monster that had appeared on Count Katina's lands. Ian asked again, "A deal?" and looked at the old warrior with interest. The knight explained that they were just heading out to hunt a monster that had appeared in the domain of the Temple of Katina. Ian clarified that by monster he meant the very same monster about which there are terrible legends. The knight asked if Ian had ever heard of a monster called a manticore. Ian froze, remembering the scary stories about this beast. The knight explained that it was a notorious and cruel magical beast that delighted in killing people. Ian realized that the knights did not mean to say that they should help them hunt the manticore and risk their lives. The knight replied that no, they didn't want to drag Ian into danger unless he wanted to. He added that, of course, if Ian himself offered help, he would not object, and would even be glad to have such an ally. The old knight was about to say something, but Ian interrupted him and said that he agreed then, without listening to the end. The knight explained that they were actually a knightly order established by the church, and they had another request for Ian. Ian asked in surprise, "What about?" and looked at the old warrior with interest. The knight said that they wanted to ask Ian not for hunting, but for help of a completely different kind. He continued that when they mentioned that they were going to the manticore, the priests in the Count's domain forced a mage to help them. Ian realized that this had deeply offended the magician, and that he now harbored a grudge against the entire order. The knight explained that this was why they wanted to ask Ian to help calm the angry man. He said that the words of another magician would be perceived differently by this person than by theirs, and this could help resolve the conflict. Ian made a decision, and said that in this case they would hire each other and help the knights with their problem. He noted that traveling with the knights was surprisingly comfortable, and it was a pleasant change after all the misadventures. Ian found all the members of the Knights of Santiago to be decent people and pleasant to deal with. He added that the journey was stress-free and they felt completely safe. Ian said, however, that if there was anything to complain about, it was their obsessive desire to convert everyone to their faith. One of the knights approached the master magician and asked if he would like to join them in studying the Bible. Ian politely refused, but the knights insisted and offered to study the Holy Scriptures together, as a whole company. Even Lucy happily agreed and said that she would join this activity with great enthusiasm. Ian said no thank you again, and the knights asked, offended, why not, since it was so interesting. He said that if he could really talk to God, he would ask him about his status window. Ian approached Mr. Dietrich and asked if he could join them in studying the Bible. The knight praised him for his excellent attitude and willingness to learn the Word of God. Ian politely thanked her for the compliment and smiled his enigmatic smile. The knight suddenly frowned and asked what was the matter and what this strange look meant. Ian said, surprised, that the same man had just said he had a great attitude, and he was simply confirming his words. The knight indignantly shouted that he had not said anything and demanded to know what voice Ian had just heard. Ian swore that someone had just spoken to him, and it wasn't the knight, but someone else. He froze and said that he understood. The voice sounded right in his head. Ian realized that it was an inhuman voice, and his heart began to beat faster with excitement. The knight smiled mysteriously and said, "Who knows? Maybe it was a sign from above. Ian said thoughtfully that perhaps he was that creature that could not be called human. Ian looked at the knight and suddenly blurted out that the same goddess was probably addressing someone invisible. Ian looked at the emptiness in front of him and couldn't believe that his interlocutor had simply up and left without answering a single question. He shouted into the void and demanded that the conversation continue immediately. Ian let out a desperate cry and demanded that she come back immediately and explain everything to him. Ian made strange, guttural sounds, unable to express his indignation and despair in words. He muttered something under his breath and realized that this conversation with the goddess was just a mockery. Ian admitted that he had dove headfirst into studying the Bible just to talk to that damn goddess one more time. As a result, he gained a new skill called Holy Arts, which gave him access to divine magic. This skill gave the ability to communicate with the graceful, noble, holy, and beautiful absolute essence of this world. Ian looked thoughtfully at the skill description and asked if this was the same goddess who gave him this blessing. He thought indignantly that the author, who calls himself a god, had thrown him into this world just to look down on him and giggle. Ian let out a short sigh and didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this revelation. Several days passed, and the detachment continued on its way. Ian saw the destroyed camp of the bandits in front of him and realized that the knights had done a good job. He noticed that the knights had, of course, carried them all away, leaving not a single one alive. Ian asked the senior knight if he himself was not wounded, and he replied that no. And how about him? The old knight laughed and said that no matter how old he was, the likes of these robbers would never take him. Ian noted that he had heard that the knight had previously been a mercenary, which would explain his fighting skills. He said it was amazing and asked why he became a knight instead of staying in the freemen. The old knight explained that he may look peaceful now, but in his youth he was quite famous. That's why he took the nickname Elder, so that no one would pester him with questions about his past. He said that there were too many idiots who, as soon as they heard his real name, immediately started a fight. Someone exclaimed in surprise, looking at something, and turned to the gentleman with concern. Ian looked at the map and saw that to the east was the Earl's castle, and to the west was the forest where the manticore was seen. He noticed that a magician lived in that forest, and they needed to meet him to resolve the conflict. Ian suggested meeting with the magician first, and then going to Count Katina, so as not to waste time. Lucy said no, she would go ahead alone, and there was no need to accompany her all the way to the castle. Ian asked with concern if she could manage alone, as the road could be dangerous. Lucy replied that she was not a child and, of course, she could manage, especially since if she went this way, she would immediately come to her uncle's house. Ian looked after her and hoped that she would be okay, and that no one would attack her on the way. He realized that he needed to deal with this magician quickly and catch up with Lucy before it got dark. One of the knights asked where his little sister was going all alone and if she was afraid of robbers. Ian replied that he would catch up with her soon. But that was not the point now, since they would soon be meeting that same magician. The knight asked if Ian was mentally prepared for this meeting, and if he was afraid of the wrath of the offended magician. Ian repeated thoughtfully, mentally prepared, and did not know what to answer to such a strange question. He said that magicians are usually difficult people, and this one would definitely be angry and irritated because of the priest's order. Ian realized that it was unknown what this magician could do to them, and why they should have to clean up the consequences of the order's mistakes. He asked himself again why they should have to clean up after the order, since it wasn't their fault that the priests had overdone it. Ian chuckled nervously and said that this was the first time he had met a mage in this world, not counting his teacher, of course. He wondered how it would all go and whether he would be able to find a common language with this offended magician. A strange laugh was heard behind the trees. A woman with disheveled hair stood there and said how nicely the cauldron with her potion was boiling. In the past, she introduced herself as Monty Campbell, a plant mage, and looked at the aliens with undisguised interest. One of the priests asked her to lend her magic to their warriors so that they could catch the manticore. He reminded her that this forest was under the jurisdiction of the order, and she was obliged to obey their demands. She said that if he wanted her to help, he would at least eat with appetite what she had prepared. Ian thought to himself, plant mage, and tried to imagine what powers lay behind that title. The knight confirmed that Monty Campbell is a famous plant mage, legendary throughout the kingdom. He explained that she not only controls plants at will, but also brews terrible, deadly poisons from them. The knight said that they just needed a strong poison to hunt the manticore, so she was perfect for the task. The knights winced at the foul smell coming from the cauldron. Ian froze and said that the smell seemed vaguely familiar to him, but he couldn't put his finger on where it was coming from. Mani giggled contentedly in her strange language and welcomed the guests into her home in the middle of the forest. She joyfully exclaimed that she was glad they could come and invited everyone to the table. Mani invited them to enjoy the treat she had prepared with special care and love for her guests. Ian coughed again and couldn't hide his disgust at the smell that filled the room. One of the knights muttered that he shouldn't have proven his strength to them in such a perverted way. Mani responded with an offended expression that she had merely served her guests a rare dish from a crop she had grown with special care. She stated that if they were not her guests, they could leave, and there was no need to spoil her mood with their whining. Mani said thoughtfully that she thought she had gone a little overboard with the ingredients, but it was too late to change anything. The knights looked in horror as Ian devoured the garlic-filled soup and couldn't believe their eyes. They whispered to each other why that guy ate so much, because it was simply impossible. One of the knights became concerned and asked Ian if he was okay and if he needed help. Ian, with his mouth full, exclaimed that it was incredibly delicious and asked for more, which shocked everyone present. Mani couldn't believe that he was talking about delicious, because it was pure poison. Ian added that the garlic was fantastic and he had never tasted anything like it in his life. Mani suddenly let out a loud, pleased cry and slapped her hand, causing everyone to flinch. She said she had been working as a plant mage for 40 years, but she had never met such an eccentric as Ian. Ian asked again in surprise, a weirdo, and did not understand how he had earned such an unflattering nickname. Mani demanded to know her name and looked at Ian with genuine interest and respect. Ian introduced himself and said that his name was Ian Eridus Raven, and that he was the apprentice of a wandering mage. Mani froze and asked again, Arians? And her eyes widened with surprise and joy. She exclaimed, so he is the pyromancer Elidith's apprentice, and could not believe such a coincidence. Mani apologized for such an unfriendly reception and said that she did not know who was in front of her. She promised that as an apology, Ian could eat as much as he wanted and no one would stop him. Mani changed the subject and asked if she had heard they were hunting a manticore, and that was true. Ian confirmed that yes, and that it would not be easy, but they were ready for any challenge. Mani said that Count Katina hired hunters to catch the manticore, but the beast killed them all. Ian said seriously that he was ready for this and was not afraid of the dangers that might await him in the forest. Mani asked if he had caught manticores before, and Ian replied that he had a couple of times when he was younger. Mani asked in surprise and to him, and looked at the knights, who were silent and hesitant. Mani said that since Elidith herself taught him, he must already be an accomplished mage, and that inspires respect. She advised Ian to help the knights with his knowledge and experience, because it is a magician's duty to help people. Ian thoughtfully repeated the duty of a magician and did not know what to answer to such a philosophical statement. Mani confirmed exactly that, and said that there are times when a magician must help people, even if he doesn't want to. She warned that such moments should not be taken lightly, otherwise one could lose the respect of colleagues. Ian admitted that, of course, he had no need to hunt. The next day arrived, and the squad set out into the forest to search for the manticore's lair. Ian felt a certain uneasy atmosphere around him, and realized that this place was permeated with fear and death. He thought about Lucy, who was probably already waiting for him at her uncle's, and hoped that she was completely all right. Oberon cawed and pointed his wing to the side, and Ian realized that the raven was saying that they were going there. The knights admired this ability and called it amazing because the bird understood human speech. Ian explained that while the raven was sitting on his shoulder, he trained it to respond to human speech and commands. Ian felt an incredible thirst for blood coming from the place where the raven pointed, and his heart sank with fear. Ian asked an unexpected question about whether if the manticore was also a monster, then maybe he could persuade it not to attack them. The old knight chuckled thoughtfully and replied that who knows, but it was hardly possible. Mani categorically stated that the manticores were not people to negotiate with, and that it was a waste of time. Ian asked Mani what she knew about summoning, and if he could use the skill against the monster. She threatened that if Ian really persuaded the manticore, she would tell Elidith everything, and she would be proud of him. One of the scouts quietly said, "Over there," and pointed forward with his hand. Ian looked in that direction and saw a manticore lying right in their path. Ian looked into the manticore's eyes and realized that it was looking right at him, and this made him freeze in place. The old knight ordered the two of them not to leave him for a step. Otherwise, they would die. The knights reported that they had coated all their weapons with a special poison that Mani had developed for this hunt. The old knight commanded fire, and the archers fired arrows straight towards the monster. However, the arrow that hit the manticore in the neck bounced off its thick skin as if it were a stone wall. The knight cried out in despair, "It can't be!" and asked the master what they should do now. The old knight said that they must attack again, and his voice sounded firm and decisive. The manticore let out a creepy laugh that sent shivers down everyone's spine. Ian realized that the monster was right in front of them, and there was no time left to think. The knight said that there was no time to strike again, and that action must be taken immediately. Ian realized that he had no choice but to use his powers to save the squad. Mani said in surprise that the guy had actually managed it, and looked at Ian with interest. She said, "Just think, he spoke to her, and called Ian an unusual person." Ian replied that the manticore should speak calmly, as before, and he was glad that she understood him. The manticore made strange guttural sounds, and told him to get lost while she was still kind. She laughed and called people shit that didn't even deserve to be killed. Ian looked at her in surprise and asked who she was and what she wanted from him. The manticore said that this was better, and to stop pretending that he didn't understand her language. She demanded that Ian speak up if he wanted something from her and not waste her time. Ian responded defiantly, her scalp, and gripped the staff in his hands, preparing for battle. The manticore burst into loud laughter and said that he was honest and that she liked it. She offered Ian to join forces with her and tear these people to pieces right now. The manticore promised that she would savor their flesh, and Ian would have all the women he desired. Ian shouted indignantly at her to shut up, and called her words vile and disgusting. Ian called the manticore a piece of shit and just scum that wasn't even worth talking about. The manticore smiled contentedly and said that this was better, and honesty was what she valued. She declared that this was precisely why he was worth killing, and prepared to attack. Mani screamed, the language of the Empire, and began to cast an ancient spell in an unknown language. She commanded it to grow, and huge tree roots began to rise up around the manticore. The knights indignantly shouted at Mani, asking what the hell she was doing, and demanded an explanation. Mani replied that she would absorb the manticore along with the knights who were nearby if they did not leave. She screamed, "Oh my God, they are not children. They will come up with something themselves and don't expect help from her." Mani stated that the main thing now was to kill the manticore, and everything else did not matter. Dietrich let out a strangled cry as the roots began to strangle him and the monster. The knights shouted to the elder and begged him to stop this crazy woman. Dietrich apologized to the gentleman and said that he had missed the manticore and it was his fault. The old knight said indignantly that he was saying such a thing and demanded that he not blame himself in vain. He said that they all tried their best and it was not their fault that the monster turned out to be so strong. Ian looked at the dying knight and said that here he would never have thought that he would see someone die with his own eyes. He realized that this world, where monsters and wars were commonplace, had nothing in common with his past life. Death, which Ian knew only from books and films, has now become a reality for him from which he cannot escape. He quietly called Dietrich's name, but he didn't answer, and his eyes were frozen in emptiness. The knight made a weak, hoarse sound, and his breathing became quieter and quieter. Ian remembered how Dietrich taught him the Bible and said that he had spoken of eternal faith in heaven. He repeated the knight's words that if you believe with all your heart and pray, the heavens will open and save your soul. Ian asked the dying man if it was true, his voice trembling with despair and hope. The old knight nodded weakly and said, "Yes, let us pray together," and extended a trembling hand to Ian. Ian looked up to the sky and asked, "All the high heavens, they are watching what is happening below." He said that their most devoted follower was dying, and would they do nothing to save him? Ian leaned over Dietrich's body and said quietly, "Wake up," and there was a pleading tone in his voice. Dietrich woke up and turned to the goddess, hoping that she would hear his desperate call. Dietrich smiled faintly, thinking that he had gone to heaven and his soul had finally found peace. The goddess told him that she was glad to see him, and her voice sounded soft and soothing. She added that he still had things to do in this world and it was time to return back. Dietrich asked again in surprise, "What's wrong?" and did not understand what the goddess was talking about. She told him to carry her will further into this world and help the weak and disadvantaged. The goddess said that let him help the weak and give them happiness, and that would be her only wish. Dietrich made a small sound, and his eyes focused back on the reality around him. The knights joyfully shouted that he had woken up and rushed to him to help him get up. Dietrich thanked Ian and said that he saved him because that great being told him to. Ian explained that he was able to use the holy arts because the goddess lent him her power for this miracle. He said that the goddess really said that he should save Dietrich because he still had a lot of work to do in this world. Dietrich knelt before Ian and called him an apostle sent by the gods themselves. He said that he bowed before him, and his voice trembled with awe and respect. The knights whispered that Ian had certainly saved Dietrich with magic, but calling him an apostle was going too far. Mani noticed that they were too cheerful for those who had just been on the brink of death, and was surprised by such enthusiasm. The young knight replied, "Yes, sir." And Ian said that he would send Oberon on a reconnaissance mission to find the monster. Ian was worried that the raven would be okay and that it might get into trouble. The old knight assured him that everything was fine, and he knew that this guy was no slouch and would cope. He said that they needed to teach this creature a lesson. Otherwise, it would kill even more innocent people. Oberon returned and screamed, "Monster!" and pointed his wing towards the forest. The manticore gave a satisfied laugh and said that this man was his father, yes, turning to the young man. The guy asked in horror how she could speak like a human being and couldn't believe his ears. The manticore made him a lucrative offer and told him to kill his father and bring his head to her. She promised that she would do this and she would spare the others and no one would suffer from her claws anymore. He shouted indignantly, "She thinks he will agree to this," and grabbed his sword. The manticore growled menacingly, then differently, and prepared to attack. She screamed and rushed at the people with incredible speed. The young man shouted "Dad" and rushed forward to protect the old man. The old knight looked at this and said, "Holy Knights of Santiago." The old knight gave the command to fight, and his voice thundered over the clearing. The manticore laughed and called them insects who were just waiting to die. The knight screamed, "What a fool!" and did not understand why they were climbing to certain death. He ordered the magician to shut up and not interfere with them fighting the monster. The manticore stated that it was futile resistance and that they would die at her paws anyway. The old knight clutched his sword and cried out, "The beast is insolent!" rushing at the manticore with incredible speed. The manticore parried the attack and let out an evil laugh, having gotten a taste of a real battle. Mani cried out the flora, and huge flowers with sharp thorns began to bloom around her. She commanded to grow, and the roots of the plants rushed towards the manticore to entangle its paws. The manticore growled that these were cheap tricks and bit through the roots with its sharp teeth. The knights retreated back and did not know how to defeat such a strong enemy. A knight from the squad shouted, "Ian Iridis, his turn!" And all eyes turned to the mage. Ian stepped forward and commanded fire, releasing a stream of flames straight into the monster's face. He shouted at the mountain, and the ground beneath the manticore's feet began to shake and rise up. The monster screamed in fear and tried to break free from its stone captivity. Ian let out a tired sigh, his body trembling from the strain of his magical powers. Ian modestly said that it was all thanks to them, the knights, and they were only fulfilling their duty to the order. Oberon sat on Ian's shoulder and sarcastically noted that he was being ignored and pecked him on the ear. Ian hissed at the raven and ordered it to shut up without drawing unnecessary attention to himself. He thought to himself that the knights must be afraid of him, since he turned the manticore into a huge fireball. The guy approached him and said that they thanked him for saving their lives. Ian sheepishly replied that yes, and added that he did it not out of gratitude, but because it had to be done. The knight approached Ian and said that he was great, and that they were able to capture the manticore only thanks to him. Ian waved his hand sheepishly and said he had simply done as Mani had said and did not deserve such praise. The knight predicted that Ian would surely charm all the nobility, and perhaps he would become someone truly great. Unfamiliar knights rode up to the detachment and asked if they had captured the manticore. The old knight answered, "Yes, indeed," and asked who they would be, looking at them with suspicion. The strangers apologized and introduced themselves as knights from Count Katina's castle, sent for the heroes. Ian asked again in surprise from the castle, and did not understand why they needed them, the knight said. Would they go with them to the palace? Count Katina greeted the heroes at the castle gates and said welcome. Ian muttered in embarrassment, "How righteous." and looked down at the floor from such attention. The old knight modestly replied that, alas, it was a mere trifle, and they were simply doing their job. The count sighed and said, "Truly, what a pity that in this castle there are no knights like them." Mani agreed and said that it was true that the count had promised that they were now allies, so he would not bother them anymore. The count turned to Ian and said that now, Mage Ian, he wanted to talk to him alone. Ian looked at the count in surprise and did not understand what else this noble man needed from him. Oberon whispered in Ian's ear that this guy was talking to his master and pecked him on the ear. Ian hissed at the raven and ordered him to be silent and not to interfere with the conversation with the count. The count added that he had heard how he had taken care of his niece, and he was very grateful to him for that. The count took out a golden magic scroll and handed it to Ian as a sign of gratitude. Ian looked at the scroll with admiration and realized that it was a golden magic scroll, a huge rarity in this world. The count explained that as soon as it was torn in two, the magic scroll activated its effect and saved the owner from death. The count asked him kindly if he liked it, and said that he had prepared it especially for Ian as a token of his gratitude. Ian bowed and said his thanks for such a valuable gift, and hid the scroll in his bag. The count laughed and said that he didn't need any thanks, adding that he had returned Lucy safe and sound. He said that it was nothing, and there was no need to worry about such a trifle as a scroll. Oberon snorted and said what kind of hat it was, and asked where the count had dug up such an old thing. Lucy told the protagonist that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and asked if he was okay after all his adventures. The guy also replied that they hadn't seen each other for a long time and looked away shyly. The knight whispered in Ian's ear that she was not his sister, and asked if she was his beloved. Ian replied that it was not at all, and said that there were circumstances here, and there was no point in meddling in something that was none of his business. The count turned to Ian and said that he had a proposition for him, and looked at him hopefully. Ian asked what it was, and prepared himself to hear something important and serious. The count replied that he was going to avenge his niece and destroy the one who dared to offend his family. He asked if he would lend him his strength and he would pay generously for each fight. Ian realized that this was why the count had given him the golden scroll, to enlist his support before his revenge. He figured that if everything went well, he could get a double reward from both the count and Lucy. Ian replied to the count that if he needed the help of such a humble magician as he, then he would certainly help. 3 days passed, and the detachment set out on the road, accompanied by servants and castle guards. The servant said that his uncle was very sorry that he could not see them off because of preparations for the military campaign. Ian politely replied that it was okay and wished the Earl luck in his noble cause. The count added that when they were again in the lands of Tarion, they would be welcome, and bowed low. The knight said that when he had time, he should visit the island of Trefar, and he would not regret it, and he promised to introduce him to its secrets. Ian asked in surprise about Trefara Island and did not understand what kind of place it was. He explained that it was an island that was located in the Coral Sea and was almost never seen on maps. The man solemnly announced that he was Salvador of the Orcus clan and straightened up to his full height. The boys asked in amazement about Salvador of the Orcus clan and couldn't believe their ears. They exclaimed that it couldn't be. That same Salvador from the White Wolves, the legendary mercenary of the past. The White Wolves mercenary squad reported directly to the former emperor and carried out his personal orders. The emperor of that time granted the commander of that group the honorary title of Master of the Sword for his services to the crown. Ian realized that this meant that this man in front of him was the legendary Sword Master. The knights repeated the words of the Sword Master in awe and bowed low before the old woman. The girl said that this man was a true Sword Master, a legend they considered fiction. Salvador said mockingly that he was going to defeat the Sword Master, and the girl looked at him with superiority. This was legendary nonsense from a man who had long ago buried his talent in the ground and was not developing it. Mani said, well, they would go, and asked me to say hello to Elidith the next time I saw her. Dietrich bowed and said a huge thank you for everything, and hoped that they would meet again in this vast world. Salvador called the hero by name, and said that when everything calmed down, he would go to the ruins of Trefara for new adventures. The man promised that they would see each other again then, and winked at him goodbye. She wished him to take care of himself and not take unnecessary risks, because there are many dangers in this world. The count remembered how Lucy clenched her fists and whispered for him to punish the one who killed her mother and destroyed her family. She remembered that this man had killed her sister, and then tried to force Lucy to marry his henchman. Count Katina thought to himself that this situation was not so bad for him, and he could use it as a cover. The Count said that when all this was over, he would talk to Lucy and explain his position to her. He swore that he would bring this hated Avenger Graham to justice and restore justice to these lands. The knights raised their swords and shouted, "Long live the Count! Everyone follow him!" and rushed to attack the enemy. Ian sat by the fire and boiled tablespoons in a cauldron, which caused confusion among those around him. Lucy approached him and asked what he was doing and why he needed it. Ian replied that he boiled spoons to disinfect them before eating. Lucy asked in surprise why they would eat them, and did not understand such a strange ritual. Ian explained that it was some kind of mystery, and she still wouldn't understand even if he explained it until the morning. One of the knights timidly approached and asked if they could boil it too. They wanted to too. Ian replied with annoyance that it was not soup and there was no need to taste it. Lucy sat down next to him and said that she had been thinking about it and wanted to discuss with him the reward for his services. Ian asked what about and looked at her curiously, waiting for her to continue. Lucy replied, "About his reward, of course," and smiled her mysterious smile. Lucy explained that she therefore thought about what would really make him happy, and it was a long process of choosing. Lucy said it was Anirecap's magic sword, and its blade glittered in the firelight. She told the legend that it was a gift from a fairy to the first Baron Tarion, who fell madly in love with her. Ian chuckled and said, "What kind of fantasy novel was this? And wasn't it a bit too pretentious for a simple sword?" He added that since they had such an amazing magic sword, why were the Tarians still just barons and not kings? Lucy hummed thoughtfully and didn't know what to answer to such an awkward question. Lucy confessed that Anirecap was buried in the grave of the first baron, and no one had seen him since then. Ian said in surprise that, in other words, to get it, you would have to dig up the grave, and that was blasphemy. Lucy sighed and said that yes, the first baron had sealed the sword in his own tomb before he died. She wondered if his descendant would just take it, dig it up, and give it to a stranger without any shame. Ian said indignantly that this was really creepy, and how could they possibly have been rummaging around in their ancestor's bosom while he was lying in the coffin? Lucy didn't understand what time capsule he was talking about and looked at him with bewilderment. Lucy said that she was so grateful to him for everything, and he deserved something equally valuable in return. That is why she wanted to give him that precious relic that had been kept for centuries. Ian looked thoughtfully and realized that it seemed he had gone too far with his questions and had offended Lucy with his words. One of the servants approached Ian and said that the Count had a request for him and asked him to go into the castle for a conversation. At this time, a quarrel arose on the road between the peasants and the thief who stole a chicken from them. The peasants shouted at them to get lost if they didn't want their heads put on pikes. The damned thieves. The thief responded that these were their words, and just give him the 3 chickens, and he would let them go on good terms. One of the peasants noticed the crow and said that this crow was similar to the one the magician had, and his face turned pale with fear. The second peasant confirmed that yes, it seemed to be her, and took a step back. Oberon recognized his master and began to joyfully croak that his master was here and flap his wings. Count Katina told the hero in his office that he had an important request for him, and his voice sounded excited. Ian became wary and asked what was going on, bracing himself for something serious. The Count hesitated and hesitated, and Ian realized that it was difficult for him to say this, and wondered what kind of request this was. The Count finally exhaled that he wanted Ian to stop the mercenaries from plundering this city, which was under his protection. Ian asked in surprise if the knights could handle this better, and did not understand why they were asking him. The Count sighed and explained that knights often kept silent about everything in order to preserve the honor of the order and their own reputation. He said he turned a blind eye to what happened to those bandits, but he couldn't do the same to innocent civilians. The Count added that this was neighboring territory, and if outsiders interfered, a war would begin between the barons. He looked pleadingly at Ian and said that if he agreed to help, it would make his people keep their cool. Oberon cawed joyfully and flapped his wings, anticipating a quick reprisal against the robbers. Ian went out and saw mercenaries robbing the houses of civilians and abusing them. The mercenaries fell on their knees and begged to be forgiven. They had learned their lesson and would not do it again. The Count and Lucy were delighted when they heard the news of the robbers being caught and the stolen goods being returned. However, the joy was short-lived, and soon disturbing news arrived from the battlefield. One of the scouts reported that they had a serious problem, and his face was pale with fear. The scout explained that in reality their army did not pose any threat to the enemy due to low morale. He said that even though there were more than 4,000 of them, they could not defeat even half of the enemy. This was all because their army was harmless and not ready for a real war with experienced mercenaries. Even if the army were to plunder this territory, the people would beg Graham to stop the invasion and protect them. After all, the title of Tarian now belonged to Graham, and he could do whatever he wanted legally. The scout added that since he and Graham had traveled peacefully, he had had enough time to strengthen his army. Moreover, since their army was unable to act due to the Count's orders, morale plummeted to 0. The Count sighed and said that yes, events had taken a strange turn, and he did not know what to do next. One of the advisors asked if he would allow them to rob in return, and looked at the Count with hope. The Count chuckled thoughtfully and turned to Ian, asking if he had a plan to fix this. Ian looked thoughtfully into the distance and said that he needed to think, and his eyes began to sparkle with a new idea. He confidently stated that he would not say that it was completely impossible, and asked to give him time to think about it. The advisor shouted impatiently, "What are your plans? Tell me quickly, time is of the essence." He slammed his fist on the table. Lucy looked at Ian with pride and said that this was their Ian and believed in his abilities. One of the knights whispered that this magician was too self-confident and that one should not place great hopes on him. Ian said that somewhere in Tarian territory there is one place that could be the key to victory. Oberon interrupted him and croaked, pecking him on the head. The peasant asked in horror who they were and stepped back when he saw armed men. One of the knights proudly announced that he was Lord Ian Eridus Raven, a student of the great sorceress Elidith. The peasant fell to his knees and said that he was asking for forgiveness. He did not know that such a celebrity was standing in front of him, and his voice trembled with fear. He begged to forgive his rudeness and explained that the wheat here was already doomed, and there would be no harvest this year. Ian asked in surprise what he meant by this, and did not understand what the peasant was talking about. The peasant replied, "Can't he feel it?" and pointed to the blackened ears of wheat. He said that the evil will that permeated this field came from the earth itself. The peasant explained that the soul of the first Baron Tarian, whose land had been stolen, was furious and cast a curse. Ian looked thoughtfully at the field and asked what to do then and how to remove this curse. It wasn't long before rumors of the curse spread throughout the area, causing panic among the people. The people of Tarian no longer trusted the usurper Graham and demanded that Lucy take the throne by birthright. Thanks to this, the morale of the Count's army soared to the skies, and the soldiers were ready to fight to the last drop of blood. They moved towards where Graham was to finally end this protracted standoff. One of the knights approached the Count and said that they refused to participate in a dishonorable battle led by a magician. The Count asked in surprise what this meant and demanded an explanation from his subjects. Yam grinned maliciously and said how one could believe the rumors that he himself had spread, and that this was absurd. The knight declared that the words of a magician cannot be trusted, and that is precisely why one must think with one's own head and not trust the first person one meets. Ian realized that since they couldn't tell whether he was lying to them or not, they simply decided to declare everything he said to be a lie. He sighed and thought, well, this is far-fetched, and he threw up his hands in helplessness. Yet the knights were the main force in this war, and without them, the Count could not win. The Count himself knew this. It was written all over his face, and he could not go against his subjects. Without his knights, he could not fight, and in the end, he had no choice but to listen to them. Ian said coldly that if that was the case, there was no point in him staying here, and took his staff. He turned to the Count and said not to bother himself, and was about to leave. Lucy screamed after him and tried to stop him, but he didn't turn around. Lucy caught up with Ian and shouted at him to wait, grabbing his arm to stop him from leaving. She said she was so sorry, her voice shaking with hurt and disappointment in her compatriots. Lucy said that the knights had treated him so rudely for no apparent reason, and she had not expected such ingratitude from them. She added that her uncle was so confused that he could not even utter a word in his defense, and she was ashamed for him. Ian felt strange, but he felt a little better after Lucy apologized so sincerely and from the heart. He replied that no, everything was fine. He was not angry. and his voice sounded calm and peaceful. Several days passed, and the Count's army was preparing for a decisive battle with the usurper Graham. The scout reported that there were about 400 enemies and asked if the captain was lying. Graham looked at him mockingly and said that he was Graham One Edge and did not have the habit of lying to his soldiers. He turned to Lucy and said how she dared to join the Count, and his voice was full of contempt and malice. Graham added, but it was no use, and she would still be his when he crushed their pathetic army. He boasted that if he could win this battle, it would be his forever, and no one would dare stand in his way. Moreover, on their side is the Black Knight of the East, a legendary warrior who has never known defeat. Graham was confident that victory was in their grasp, and his soldiers cheered in response. The captain of the Count's army looked at the enemy and reported on the number and location of the troops. He said that the enemy army was lined up in battle formation and they were ready to attack. Graham shouted that he didn't care if there were 400 or 4,000 of them. He would cut down anyone who dared to raise a sword against him. They realized that the numerical superiority was enormous, and at this rate, they would definitely win. The Count looked at the battlefield and asked who this knight was, and said that he was incredibly strong. They told him that this Black Knight was from the Eastern Empire, and his armor could not be confused with any other. The Count said in surprise that this place was famous for its long winters, and asked what the fourth knight was doing here. Ian, who had been watching the battle from afar, let out a surprised exclamation and realized that the situation was getting tense. He said something was wrong, and this knight was incredibly fast and just mowed down their army like grass. Ian saw that the army was retreating and realized that if this continued, the Earl would be in serious trouble. He wondered what would happen if their center was broken through and the enemy came out to the rear. He said that if the center retreated, the Black Knight would not chase the fugitives, but would go straight to the Count. The Count called his soldiers worthless fools and ordered Sir Decade to go to the front and slay this Black Knight. The advisor begged him to calm down and not send his best warrior to certain death. He screamed in rage and could not believe that his order was being challenged. He asked why Sir Decade and what he had done to deserve such an unenviable fate. Ian remembered that this knight was the only one who treated him like a human being, and he did not want him to die. He said that such a noble knight should not die at the hands of some mercenary. Ian realized that if he went out onto the field now, he would not return alive, and his heart sank with pain. He pleaded with them to wait. There had to be another way to stop this armored monster. Sir Decade put on his helmet, preparing for the final battle. The advisor shouted what he was going to do and tried to stop him, but the knight had already galloped away. Ian shouted that going out there now would be suicide, and it would be better to take the Count and retreat to the castle. Sir Decade replied that he had entered into the service of his lordship and must follow his knightly oath to the end. Ian said he already knew this, but for a modern person, it was just a senseless death. He said that this was not protection. It was simply an exchange of one life for another, and ordered to look at the dead soldiers. Ian saw that Sir Decade knew and understood perfectly well what was happening, and yet he still walked to certain death. He wondered if this world always had to sacrifice noble people like him. The soldiers shouted Sir Decade's name and tried to stop him, but he did not listen. One of the officers reported that it was the knight who guarded the center, and to their shame, they were defeated. He said that every second counted, so he retreated along with his lordship. Another officer said indignantly, "What a shameless person," and abandoned his post, saving his skin. One of the counselors turned to Ian and said that he too must accompany his lordship and Baron Tarion to the castle. Ian replied that he would stay here and buy them time so that they could retreat in peace. He commanded everyone to follow him and rushed forward to the very center of the battle. Ian wondered to himself if he could just let Sir Decade go to his death and do nothing. He reflected that a man who followed the knightly code to the very end, even among all these scum, deserved respect. Ian wondered if it was fair that he alone should die in a war started by fools. Lucy screamed at him and tried to stop him, but he didn't listen. He said that he wanted to get out of here alive and hoped that they would see each other again in this world.